whole idea that there might be a static body of theory theorizing something, a static body of practice, is completely foreign to Brecht's understanding of what he's doing right from the outset. It comes to have a lot to do with Marxist theory and the idea of what he wants his works to do, to be in dialogue with reality. But this is an inclination from the very beginning, long before he ever became a Marxist. So Steve quoted that remark about Brecht's plays failing to live up to his theory. It's sort of a nonsensical misunderstanding of the relationship between these different sorts of writings. There isn't a body of theory like that anything could fail to live up to. It's also, as I suppose I'm making clear already, these are writings and these are ideas. I perhaps should prefer the term ideas rather than theory. These are ideas in process. In a later essay in the late 1930s, he says, "Die Theorie muss den ganzen Marsch enthalten." The theory must encompass the whole journey. It's not taken at a particular point of time to theorize one thing. And if you look at the texts, the longer texts that he produced and published himself, then you always need to look at the context in which they were produced. And we've talked briefly already about the Short Organon, which isn't just a theory of theatre, of course, but a critique of social context and the function of culture as well. It's also a sneaky way of smuggling modernist ideas into a hidebound, socialist, realist-dominated post-war communist Germany. So it has a purpose in a particular context. It's not something which should easily be ripped from that context. So as well as these continual processes of critical reflection about the nature of his work and every aspect of his work, Brecht also from very early on is interested in trying to record and document his work in some way or another. It starts off even in the Weimar Republic, where Karl Koch films one of his plays in production, and Willi Seeger, a great theatre photographer, takes photographs of man equals man, so we have hundreds of photographs of man equals man for pretty random reasons, really. It could just as well have been one of the other productions that was so well documented, but it's that one that is best documented. And from the outset, Brecht was fascinated by the photographs, more fascinated by the photographs than by the film. The films moved too fast, obscured the details, didn't allow one to analyse and focus, work on the stage setup and read it in detail. And so even from Karl Koch's film, he extracted the stills. This is back in the late 1920s. Then in exile, the idea of documenting and recording things became even more important for him. With fascism sweeping across Europe, Brecht at times seems genuinely to have believed that everything he was doing might be lost. He asked Ruth Berlau to learn his poems off by heart, in case no written or published versions of anything survived. You have to think your way a little bit into that mindset. He had miniaturized photographs made of his typescripts, which he then deposited in a New York library, where they still are to this day, in case there was nothing left of Europe, or nothing left of his traditions in Europe. And it's in that context then that he starts also documenting his own productions, few and far between as they were in exile. And Ruth Berlau, again one of his closest collaborators, particularly on this visual side, started taking photographs. And she made contrast in the Antigone model, which I've given an example of here. There are only photographs organized in a narrative sequence. And these are examples of the pages as they will appear in Brecht on performance, as Brecht also intended it, with the photographs here, lines from the play underneath the photograph, and then a commentary describing what's going on the left-hand side. And this is those are the last photographs from the prologue, and these are the first ones then of the main action, with Antigone and Ismene entering the playing field. And, well, I'll read the text. But Antigone went, King Oedipus' child, with her pitcher gathering dust to cover the body of dead Polynices, which the wrathful tyrant had thrown to the dogs and the vultures. That's what it says under the first picture, and then underneath. To her gathering dust, there appeared her sister, Ismene. Now, the interesting thing about this particular example, the reason why I chose it, is that these model books are often set up in a very undogmatic way, with contradictions and problems drawn attention to, rather than simply saying, this is how it's done and this is how it has to be done. So that here, on the left-hand side, it says, question. The person portraying, get down on my hands and knees here, the person portraying Ismene seems to have performed without any change of position or any particular gesture in this scene. But shouldn't there at least be a difference in her attitude outside of the acting area and within it? Since otherwise the difference between waiting for her entrance and waiting for Antigone's response cannot be expressed. Answer. Yes. Ismene could, from line 21 onwards, veil her face as she steps into the acting area. Question. So what you did was incorrect. Answer. Yes. Now that looks like one of those cases where Brecht has set up a very clearly naive and, that's clear where the authority is coming from. Nonetheless, it's interesting that he chooses to record this and have that commentary alongside. And I think very often by those sorts of means, we're invited into this process and invited to reflect and comment on it as well, not just to receive it passively. This is the first picture from the Mother Courage book. This has, again, more paratextual material by way of essays on aspects of the production and the idea and the use of the model as well. And the pictures here can be divided into, on the one hand, those that portray particular details, notable instances of gestus and so on, and on the other, those that show how the plot unfolds. And the plot photographs, if I can call them that, are organised in narrative sequence, with short descriptive captions. This is the caption, first one. And they could virtually all be said to reveal some sort of essential organisation or blocking arrangement of the actors on stage. But they're not by any means all turning points in the narrative or anything like that. Some seem to have been chosen precisely to reveal how little has changed from one point in the play to the next. And Brecht seems to have developed a surprising and unironic faith in the power of these photographs to convey something essential about his productions. It's surprising because otherwise we know how sceptical Brecht could be about all sorts of processes of representation. But here, he chooses to ignore the fact that the camera is a far from neutral observer and a medium of construction, if you like. He instructed Bella to make similar photographs, not only of his own work, but of other theatres' work as well, though one can imagine that they said no. I haven't pursued that. But in a letter he asked her to do that, saying, so I can see what they can achieve. This was a way simply to record and analyse what people were doing in the theatre. And then he recommended in a text for the publisher of the Antigone model that readers might read his plays alongside the accompanying photographic documentation. Because, I quote, the reader of plays can generally only imagine the events in relation to the theatre productions that he's already seen, and they won't always be much good. But it's in another letter to another exile acquaintance and close friend and photographer, who also worked at the Berlin Ensemble as a photographer, Gerhard Goethart, which betrays the almost sensuous pleasure that theatre photographs could occasion for Brecht. He writes, on my table your chalk circle and courage of photos is spread out. I rummage around in them like Monsieur Harpagon in his money. He loved this material. So there's an enjoyment of it, there's an analytic purpose to it, and they're also part of the scientific and experimental method to which Brecht aspired in the theatre. They were to be, I would say, a documentation of epic theatre in practice, a practical deictic parallel to the potentially dry theory of the short orgamment. And it's no accident that the theoretical essay and the first worked out models date from about the same time, before and just after Brecht's return to a devastated Europe, uncertain about his reception and his opportunities. Both of them were designed to uphold epic theatre and to defend it, both against the old complacency and against the new wave of Stanislavski-inspired theatre work. Brecht felt, with some justification, peculiarly embattled even after the foundation of the Berlin Ensemble in November 1949, as we've already heard, beset by Stalinist bureaucrats and pursued by accusations of formalism and things like that. The photographs were to make it clear, in a way that the theory alone perhaps never really could, that he was working concretely, historically, and with reality, and not in some rarefied formalist art world. Indeed, it's striking how in these publications, as in his daily directorial work in the theatre, Brecht skirted around his own carefully evolved terminology. We've already talked about that as well. The word verfremdung is extraordinarily sparingly used in the model book.